Alright, so as we talked about, we saw the amphibious warfare, etc., correct? We're now going to move on to a different theater, and that, of course, will be the North African and the European theater. Okay, so here we go, right? So by North Africa, you can barely see it here. There's Tripoli, Algeria, Morocco, Casablanca comes in, El Alamein in Egypt, Turkey, and then we're going to try to do work in this way. Everything that is kind of gold is a neutral country. Areas under Axis control will be the light. The dark is the Axis power. And then the really, really light stuff is the Allies. Now, if you notice, the Allies, it's basically England at this point. Soviet Union, Egypt, etc. There's really not a lot. And so things are not looking so great. But at this time, it starts to change. Now, as we get involved in the North African European theater, it is traditional fighting. By that I mean there's a lot of tanks. However, there also will be some big battles, and the biggest battles here, we have Battle of Britain, Battle of the Bulge, which we will talk about, Battle of Stalingrad, which we will talk about as well, D-Day, and El Alamein. And I'm not talking about El Alamein, but I will mention it shortly. Now, as we get involved in the European things in 42, Churchill, Roosevelt sit down in Casablanca, which, if we go back to our map, right, is here. They sit down in Casablanca and they have a conference. And what they do is, we've got to agree on something. And that is, how do we want this war to end? Now, by telling on the cartoon here, right on their back step, here we have Hitler, we have Mussolini, we have Toyo hanging out in the window, right? FDR, Churchill. They issue an ultimatum at the Casablanca conference, and that is unconditional surrender, right? So what I need you to know at the Casablanca conference is that Roosevelt, Churchill say that World War II will not end unless the Axis power unconditionally surrender. So what is an unconditional surrender then? Unconditional surrender means you basically give up and you are going to accept whatever we're willing to give you. You are not going to make any demands. You're not going to say, hey, I got to keep this or I got to keep that. We want you at our mercy. And so that's where we're going to go with that. Now, the commander put in charge of North Africa will come up here. Now, the other thing decided, and I skipped over this, in the Casablanca conference is where we're going to go. And so Churchill said, well, there's a weak underbelly. And by that, you know, an alligator has tough scales, but its underbelly is very soft. And the underbelly of the Axis powers was Italy. And so the United States will kind of invade up through Italy, work their way up into kind of the bottom part there, okay? Now, the man put in charge in North Africa, later put in charge of the European, probably one of the best and highly regarded generals, not just of Germany, but of all the war, is General Erwin Rommel. So much so he earned the nickname Desert Fox. And a fox is known for cunning and different things like that. And so he was very astute. He was very smart in what he did. So for Erwin Rommel, I need you to know he's in charge of the North African, later European theater for the Germans. Now his counterpart is kind of a folklorish hero, and when we picture a general, this guy MacArthur or Eisenhower come to mind. Like these are the big three, okay? This is General George S. Patton, and so George S. Patton was known for not cracking a smile very often, and he was as equally astute as Rommel, and challenged him and took him on. Okay, and so that's our little battle we have there. Now, if you remember, the Germans had invaded the Soviet Union at this point, and in 1942, as you saw on the map there, the Battle of Stalingrad took place. And the Germans got there, and they are dog-tired, and things went on. But they did fight, and the Soviet Unions fought for their city, And in the end, what happens is the Russians win and they push the Germans back. And as the Germans retreat back to Germany and they leave their dead and they don't come back for them, the Russians and the Soviets are still pressing with them. And so their goal is to press them all the way back into Berlin. And that's what they're doing now. And keep in mind, we're coming up from the bottom, from Italy, and we're going to meet them. And that leaves one last little place, and that, of course, would be the Western Front with France. So we have the two-front war, the East-West fronts. On the east, the Soviet Union is winning as of 1942, and they're pressing the Germans back into Berlin. And so our decision is we've got to do something with the West fronts. We've got to come in and we've got to help. So here's some more scenes from Battle of Stalingrad, right? And to have that, we're going to talk about this. Now here's the Eastern Front. You can see how things are going and how it kind of just went crazy, and they attacked and then they retreated and they attacked. Whereas the Western Front is pretty nonchalant. Everything's basically been decided. So as I said, they're pressing back this way. We're pressing up and this way, trying to come up underneath them. But we really need a European landing. We've really got to take France. And so we will talk about that here in just 1 second.